Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another hour of Health Conclusions, where we give our listeners important information on nutrition, exercise, and holistic, alternative, and integrative medicine. Please take a minute to visit our website at www.healthyconclusions.com and like us on Facebook. My name is Bob Neugebauer, and I will be your host for this evening's show. Tonight's show is being brought to you by Altrua Health Share, which has been serving its members and their families with their health care needs since 1997. Please take a moment to visit their website at altruahealthshare.org or call 888-244-3839 to see just what Altrua Health Share can offer you for your family's health care needs. It could mean substantial savings. Our guest for this evening is Mike Hillenbrandt, who is an area director for fitness at Axiom Gym. He is a graduate of Boise State University with a degree in exercise science and has earned several personal training certifications as well as trained hundreds of one-on-one clients. Mike currently oversees 40 to 50 personal trainers at the 4 Treasure Valley Axiom locations. Is there anything else that you would like to tell your audience about yourself?
You know, I think you pretty well covered it there. That's the meat and potatoes of what I do and who I am.
Well, let's get into some of these things about nutrition. Top nutrition myths, let's say they are debunked. Are carbs bad when you're trying to get lean? And aren't carbs just sugar when your body breaks them down?
You know, yes, the body breaks down all carbohydrates into simple sugars eventually, but the key here is how long does it take for the body to break those down into simple sugars. So, for example, if we were just to have a soda that is loaded with simple sugars, that hits our bloodstream very quickly. And the result of that means that our blood sugar rises very quickly. We get an insulin response to that we're not able to respond to quick enough. And the likelihood that that is going to get stored as body fat is very high. On the contrary, if we have a good whole grain carbohydrate, a slower digesting carbohydrate where it breaks down into simple sugars over several hours, we get a much smaller insulin response from that. And the likelihood that we're able to use those sugars as they're produced in our bloodstream is much higher.
So if you're going to be eating bread, and is bread preventing you from losing fat on the basis of eating whole grain breads? Does that help?
It does help. Bread's received a real bad rap over the years. And I think the key thing to keep in mind here is that we're trying to take a look at nutrition as a whole. And for most people, there's no one key thing such as bread that is preventing you from accomplishing your fitness goals. So with bread, I do recommend a 100% whole wheat bread if you are going to do it. Bread is fine and it's okay to incorporate, but again, by incorporating the 100% whole wheat, we're getting a slower digesting carbohydrate that is less likely to have a negative impact on our blood sugar.
When we talk about bread and we talk about grains, do you recommend organic, or are you not interested in the organic end of this? Because from what we know now about the GMO products and the glyphosate that's in our foods, I don't personally eat regular bread anymore. I have to have an organic bread or I don't eat it, period. And it has to be a whole grain. But from your perspective, would you prefer organic to regular?
I absolutely prefer organic to regular whenever possible. And that being said, I think it's important. And my personal opinion is, if there is a situation or a circumstance where an individual is not able to get organic products, and for one meal, let's say they're out to lunch and they don't have the option to have an organic bread, I think it's safer just to pick a 100% whole wheat bread when possible. But absolutely, if somebody's able to budget in organic products, and I think that they are superior to non-organic, I do think that there is some buzz around the word organic that probably doesn't give merit to how healthy it actually is. I do believe that there are some things that don't make a big difference between organic and non-organic, but whenever possible, I always recommend that somebody try to eat organic.
Well, we all know there are certain things that are sprayed numerous times when they're being grown. In particular, things like coffee and strawberries, blueberries, they're sprayed a lot in the fields. In fact, more times than most people would like to know about. So, I do agree with you. I think the organic way to go is the way to go. As far as breads, we have to also talk about cereals and other carbohydrates that we ingest. I presume you would recommend the same thing when it comes to those types of foods?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And especially with cereal, you get into these carbohydrates and it becomes really challenging. You have to pay close attention to the label. And whenever possible, choosing things that are organic, I think is very important, but also paying attention to the level of sugar that are in those products. And you can get a good organic cereal, for example, that is loaded with sugar, much more than you may need. And I think a lot of times people, presume that it's much more healthy because it's organic, but we need to still pay attention. That's not the only thing on the label that we should be looking for. We should still be looking for, those whole grains, and we should be looking for those carbohydrates that are higher in fiber and lower in sugar.
So you probably recommend a whole plant-based diet, I would presume, with smaller amounts of protein. I don't know how you feel about the protein end of this, but certainly keep people away from sugar and high fructose foods.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And I mean, when it comes to, plant-based, I think it's very, very important. And if somebody was able to eat a mostly plant-based diet with the organic options, I believe that's the healthiest route to go.
So when you talk about a plant-based diet, where does protein fit into this diet? And where do things like oils fit in? And we're talking about not the processed oils, but the good oils.
I think it's very important to take a look at the type of protein that one is getting in is a very important part of this. And again, when you look at oils, it's the type of oils. I do believe that plants should be the basis of somebody's diet. For example, if you're looking at your plate of food, contrary to the typical American plate, I think most of that plate should be made up of plant-based foods. Protein does play an important role in our nutrition program. And depending on what your goal is, protein is an important part of that plan. And how much do you really need is another question. But the mistake that a lot of Americans make is getting in poor quality protein. And things such as, high saturated fat, red meats, your pork, your things that are loaded with these nitrates and saturated fats. So with that plant-based diet, having lean proteins is a very important part of it. And you also bring up oils. And I think oils such as, good olive oils, look at avocados and even your other nut oils that you may have, or just nuts in general coming from things like almonds and cashews. There's so many good benefits that come from those. And I think that should be an important part of somebody's plan as well. Plant-based diet that's high in those healthy fats with some moderate good sources of protein is a great route to take.
Well, there's been a great myth that the fat from animal protein is not good for you for years. The same thing with the eggs. They've said that's not good for you. But this is turning around now. And they are saying that you do need some of this fat in your body just as well as you need the plant-based fats and the ones from coconut oil and from nuts and what have you. But by and large, when you eat protein, again, would you suggest that they use the grass-fed protein, which is more organic, doesn't have the antibiotics in it that the normal beef would have when they produce it, and they grain feed them with corn?
When it comes to beef or your higher fat products, I do believe that grass-fed is the best way to go. And the benefit that you get from grass-fed products really shows up in the quality of the fat that you get from that product. So something like a beef that may have, as much as 30% fat, that can make a big difference in the quality of fats that you're getting in there. And you're absolutely right. There's been numerous studies that have come out that have shown some of this fat that comes from animal protein is absolutely necessary, and it's not as bad as they used to think that it was, but the quality of it. When we're eating eggs, we want to look for those eggs that come from happy chickens, that we're able to get the good quality fats from the yolk. And with the beef, whenever possible, the grass-fed beef is going to produce a much higher quality of fat.
Well, you certainly give me an experience. I have to talk to you about one more thing. Have you had any experience in training anyone who has been on a ketogenic diet?
Yes, I have.
And what has been your experience with that? Now, let's explain to the folks first what a ketogenic diet is.
Yeah, so a ketogenic diet is basically you're getting the majority of your calories from fat, which is very contrary to what they used to believe was healthy for you back in maybe the 70s, 80s, even coming into the 90s when low fat was a very big fad. So a ketogenic diet means that you're making up sometimes as much as 60 to 70% of your overall calorie consumption from fat. It's lower in protein. Protein's typically falling in that 10 to 15% of your calorie intake range, and then very, very low in carbohydrates. Carbohydrates should make up about 10%, if that, of your overall calorie intake.
So when you're talking about people being in the exercise business and people who are actually performance-oriented, I've been reading that you can store up to 2,000 calories in glucose in your body, but you can store up to 20 or 30,000 calories in oils and ketones in your body, which would give you a much higher performance factor, say, if you were running a marathon.
Yes. For somebody like running a marathon, what we do know is that fat is a very good source of energy, and it's a source of energy that we store very well. I think the key here with the fat, or with anything in general, is just making sure that calorie consumption is under control. Because a ketogenic diet can be very beneficial, but we have to pay attention to the overall calorie consumption as well.
Well, thank you very much, Mike. We're going to have to take a quick break here. We'll be back in a few minutes. You're listening to Healthy Conclusions, brought to you by Altrua Health Share, with your host, Bob Neugebauer, on 580 KIDO. Welcome back to Healthy Conclusions on 580 KIDO. We are speaking with Mike Hillenbrand, and he is a trainer at the Axiom Gym. This is sponsored by AltruaHealthShare.org. So, Mike, let's get back to talking about what is the best cardio for fat loss, because we know America has an obesity problem. I used to be that way. I mean, I was a fat 225 pounds at one point, and now I'm just a Slim Jim at 175. But it took me a year and a half to lose that weight, and it was not an easy trial and tribulation. It took a long time. How do you lose this fat, and what's the best way to do it?
In its most basic form, the most important thing for people to start doing is start moving. You have to start moving. We know that calorie burn is an important part of the overall weight loss process, and so getting moving is the first step. And being able to move more than you're taking in, obviously making sure that our output is greater than our input of energy. Now, when it comes to the best way to do that, the studies are showing us that our high-intensity interval training is the most efficient, most beneficial way to lose weight and body fat.
So when you talk about high-intensity training, can you explain what that is? Because I don't think most people understand that.
Absolutely. So you think back to the Richard Simmons days when it was really popular to take on low-intensity exercise so we could really get into what they called the fat-burning zone. High-intensity interval training is where you have really intense bouts of exercise followed by rest. And usually the most beneficial way to do this is 3 parts rest to 1 part work. So this could be 30 seconds of high-intensity exercise followed by 90 seconds of lower-intensity exercise. So if you're in a position where you can jog or run or maybe even sprint, this would be 30 seconds of that followed by maybe a 90-second walk. And what the studies are showing is repeating this high-intensity bout 6 times, 3 times per week, can be as beneficial for weight loss and for cardiovascular health as 60 minutes of steady state exercise every day of the week.
Well, that's an excellent suggestion for our younger people in the audience, but what do you do about the older people who have become so sedentary over their lives, and especially the ones in their 60s and their 70s that are trying to get back into shape? I mean, is this something that would fit them, or would you recommend something different?
It has to fall within your tolerable range. Nobody should ever push themselves so far out of their comfort zone that there's pain associated with it. That being said, this can be modified for anybody at any age. So maybe it's not a sprint or a jog, but maybe it's on a stationary bicycle, something that's a little lower impact on the joints, or even on a recumbent bicycle, or maybe it's swimming in the pool. The key thing here is that you take 30 seconds to push yourself a little harder than you normally would. So at the end of that 30 seconds, you feel tired out. And then you follow that up with 90 seconds of fairly comfortable activity. So this doesn't have to be a sprint. If you're not comfortable with all the pressure on your joints, I encourage you to take something maybe into the pool, or try an elliptical, a stationary, or a recumbent bicycle, but apply the same principles of 1 part work to 3 parts rest.
Well, that's also good. Again, I'd like to talk about, the people in the older age group, which we have a lot of them here in Idaho. Probably 20% of the population is up in that 60 area, getting ready for retirement. But when you talk about training, when people get older, they tend to lose muscle mass. And how would you suggest that they bring that back into a workout session? Do they use the Nautilus machines? Do they use weight training? What method would you use if you were, say, me?
You bring up a really great point, and the challenge that a lot of people have as they age is they lose that muscle mass. With that comes a lowering of metabolism, and it comes lower energy and a lower quality of life. So what we need to do is we need to start slow and work our way back up. It's a use it or lose it principle. If we're not using our muscles, we're going to lose our muscles. So people should start at about that 2 to 3 times per week with resistance training. Now, resistance training can be on the Nautilus selectorized equipment. That's the equipment where you typically will go in, sit down, set a setting on your seat, put the pin in the machine, and move the weight. My recommendation there is to move that weight about 10 to 15 times. And this should be something that's fairly challenging for you, but it should also not cause pain. And if you were to do a full body movement on the machines 2 to 3 times per week with a good 48 hours rest in between, that's what we recommend for people that are just starting. Now, machines are great, but you also want to incorporate what we call free weight exercises as well. And free weight exercises don't provide the support of a machine. So we should slowly start incorporating things like body weight squats, where we're working on maybe it's just sitting down into a chair and standing back up 10 to 15 times. The benefit of a free weight exercise is that it more lines up with what you might do in your actual daily life. And most people that are just trying to improve quality of life and reduce the risk of injury, the free weight exercise is a great way to do that.
They say that squats are probably one of the most important parts of fitness, particularly for older people, because they do tend to lose their balance. If an older person loses their balance, and I know quite a few of them who have done that in their lives, and it can be crippling to them when they have to go or lose a hip, or they break a femur, or whatever it might be. How important are the squats? And I do them when I go down to the gym, but even 30 of them, I would imagine, would stabilize your system, your body, your legs.
The squat, I would venture to say, is the single most important exercise for anybody to include into their routine. And the reason why is it's the functionality to daily life. We use the squat so many times in our daily life, and if we are not comfortable with that movement and we don't have the muscles developed in order to do that movement properly, our risk of injury, especially in somebody that perhaps in the older population, increases significantly. So you want to become comfortable with that exercise, train those muscles that accomplish that exercise, so when you do go to sit down in a chair and find that it's not right behind you like you thought, you have the strength and the ability to stand back up, so we can reduce that risk of injury and put ourselves in a better position for a higher quality of life.
So when you get a client, do you set goals for them when you meet them, and just take a look at their body fat and what they've been eating? Do you set calorie counts for them, and then set goals that they have to reach at a certain point in time if they're going to the gym on a regular basis?
Absolutely. I believe that it's key to develop a starting point, and that starting point should include measurable objectives moving forward. And I think that's the mistake that a lot of people make, is they have a general idea of maybe I want to get in better shape, but they fail to identify exactly what that means and how they can measure progress. Because measuring that progress and being able to say after 2 weeks or 4 weeks or 6 weeks, hey, I'm moving closer to that goal that I identified with, that can be a huge key to somebody's overall success.
I guess patience is the virtue in most of these cases, and a lot of people aren't patient. I notice at the gym that I go to, which is your gym, the Axiom, that right around February, end of January, February, the whole place fills up and you can't find a parking space outside. And everybody is down there working out, and I see all of these older people, kind of mulling around and walking very slowly, sitting on the machines a lot longer than most people would normally do that, and then they disappear. How do you encourage them to come back and to keep working out? I mean, what do you do to motivate them?
I think the big thing is results are motivating. And if people don't see results when they're exercising, they start weighing out, is it really worth the time, energy, and effort that I'm putting into this activity? And it usually is at about that 5 to 6 week mark where people start asking that question. And if they're not seeing some kind of visible physical progress at that point in time, they usually get discouraged and want to leave. And so if you're not measuring your progress, like we mentioned, and you're not tracking whether or not you're progressing towards your goal, that's when most people fall off. So my encouragement for them is set goals that you can actually measure 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks. And when you see progress, that's encouraging. You want to keep going.
We have to take a break. We will be back in a few minutes. You're listening to Healthy Conclusions, brought to you by Altrua Health Share with your host, Bob Neugebauer, on 580 KIDO. Welcome back to Health Conclusions on 580 KIDO. We are speaking with Mike Hillenbrand. He's a trainer at the Axiom Gym right here in Meridian and Boise. We are being sponsored today by AltruaHealthShare.org. Mike, we're talking about calorie intake and the training that goes into bringing somebody back into a reasonable weight and getting them physically fit. How much does the type of food that they're eating play in getting them there in a quicker time frame?
I think the type of food plays a large role in that, and the type of food will help to determine your overall calorie energy intake, which is the mathematical part of losing body fat and losing body weight. It's consuming fewer calories than you burn on a daily basis.
Well, we know as citizens, as Americans themselves, they call us the ugly Americans or the fat Americans nowadays. People eat processed food today more than they ever have before. And I have gotten to the point now where my garbage is 1 can. It used to be 3 because I don't have any processed food anymore. And the one place in the supermarket you don't find a crowd is in the produce section. So when it comes to food, I mean, do you just tell people, get away from all of this boxed, processed stuff and get down to some nitty-gritty whole foods? Go to the produce section that you've never visited in the last 3 years and see what it's like?
It's a very, very good place to start. And I think the important thing is just to look at the overall volume of food that you eat on a daily basis and ask yourself this question: is the plate that you're eating from, or is the meal that you're eating from, mostly consisted of those whole foods, the produce, the vegetables, the fruits? And if the answer is no, I would consider somebody to take a hard look at their nutrition program and think about how they can make changes to incorporate more of that fresh produce in their diet.
Well, I think we also have to talk about the fact that, we have this bane of the modern diet, and everybody's been eating wheat forever and ever. we all know about what goes on with the production of wheat and production of corn, what's good, what's bad. But when you get down to the nitty gritty, it's more like the lettuces and the cabbages and the Brussels sprouts and the broccoli and most of the things we hated as kids that are the best for us because they not only have the natural vitamins and minerals, but also enzymes that are necessary for the body to convert into energy the food that we're processing.
Yes, absolutely. And you think of this, think too, not only does it have the vitamins and the minerals and the enzymes, but it also has so much volume associated with it. So if you were to take, for example, an entire bag of broccoli, most people could consume that on a daily basis from a calorie standpoint and have no issues with how many calories they're taking in. So when you fill your plate with things like the broccoli and the cauliflower and the spinach and the kale and all those things that you mentioned we didn't enjoy to eat as children, what you'll find is that your stomach is more full of food because there's so much volume associated with that. And we call these foods nutrient-dense foods that are low in calories. And it helps you to feel full. It helps you to feel satisfied as well, but it doesn't have those calories associated with it like the processed foods do, like the boxed and the canned foods do.
Well, when we look at what we're eating and we look at how many times we eat in a given day, I know I've gotten down now to eating twice a day, almost once a day in some cases, where I'll eat one large meal within a 6-hour period and just take my time eating it. Do you have any recommendations when it comes to the let's have breakfast, lunch, and dinner, or maybe we don't really need all of that food because there's a lot of empty carbs going into it?
Yeah, I think it's very, very important to take a look at what works best for you and what works best for your schedule. I don't think it would make sense just to eat a meal. But I do also think that it's okay if somebody wants to eat 3, 4, 5 times a day. That's okay as long as they take a look at the portion and the type of foods that they're eating. For example, for me, I like to eat every 2 to 3 hours. It's something that I'm accustomed to, and I believe that my body and my goals need it. But that means I need to make smarter choices where I eat smaller portions of food and I incorporate more vegetables into each one of those sittings. Because if we're just eating these meals because we've always done it and we're loading up on processed foods and foods that are high in calories, then it's likely that we're going to go over our overall calorie need and add excess body fat that we don't want.
Well, it's known that 60% of our energy is actually used digesting food. And, the digestive system is basically your immune system. And if it's constantly busy digesting food, it doesn't have time for a lot of other things, nor do you have a lot of energy left to do a lot of other things. So I would think that eating smaller portions or eating maybe once a day or twice a day would change that whole process, and especially late at night. I mean, you don't want to eat 3 hours before you go to bed because they say that's another problem, that the food just lays in your stomach and doesn't go anywhere.
Yeah, and again, I think it's important to take a look at what it is that you're eating. There's definitely foods that move, that are easier for the body to digest and that don't tax it as much. If you go out and you have a big burger and fries, that's something that's really taxing for that digestive system, and that's something that certainly could sit in your stomach. And the mistake that most people make is they save their larger meals for nighttime, typically before they go to bed, when in all reality, we should be consuming those calories around our more active times of the day. And people are typically a little more active in the morning and in the afternoon when we're actually going to be using that food. And then as we get on to our less active times of the day, such as the evening, then we make the smarter choices where we're lower in calories and we're still high in nutrients. But I think it's important to take a look at what works for your schedule. There are different ways to eat and different times to eat that you can make work for your schedule that can also work for your fitness goals.
Well, I would think that most people, I go back to when I was a child, and we would have our big meal in the afternoon, in late afternoon, like at 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock. That was our dinner, supper, whatever you want to call it. Now, nowadays, people are eating at 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock at night when everybody gets home from work, and I think that's kind of damaging to them.
Absolutely. I agree 100%. And I was like that growing up. That was our family. We ended up eating our big meal at 6 or 7 o'clock at night, and then we'd go to bed shortly thereafter. And the challenge with that is you're consuming all this energy and all those calories right before you go lay down for 8 hours at night. And so you're not able to really use that energy. And so what ends up happening is that's when it gets converted into the body fat. So I agree. When we can consume those calories more, maybe in the early afternoon, around our more active times of the day, we're far more likely to use those calories doing the activities that we do during a day.
I'd like to get back into the protein end of eating again. You're a trainer. What do you think of the whey products that are out there that they use as a protein to build your body and your muscles?
Sure. I think it's very important that people take a look at as much natural whole protein as they're able to get. And depending on somebody's protein goal, a whey protein from a good source may be an option to help somebody accomplish their fitness goals. But there's so many different kinds out there, and the way that these are processed is a big part of the equation as well. And it's really hard to know if you're getting something that's good and quality. So whenever possible, I recommend that we get as much protein as we can from those good whole sources. And there are some people with a little higher protein need that may have challenges with that, and it might be beneficial for them to incorporate something like that.
Well, what do you consider the best sources of protein?
I think the best sources of protein, again, depending on somebody's fitness goals, but we obviously look at some of our lean sources of protein first. You have your things like your eggs and your fish that we know are really high, really bioavailable, meaning that we're going to use a lot of that protein. Your chicken and even your beef, your leaner cuts of beef for most people are going to be a really good option there as well. And then some people that like the dairy products, even things like your cottage cheese and your milk, have a very high quality protein in them. Some people don't tolerate those products well or choose to live a dairy-free lifestyle, and that's obviously not going to be a good choice for them.
We have to take another quick break here. We'll be back in a few minutes. You're listening to Health Conclusions, brought to you by Altrua Health Share with your host Bob Neugebauer on 580 KIDO. Welcome back to Health Conclusions on 580 KIDO. We're speaking with Mike Hildenbrandt from the Axiom Gym. He's a trainer there, and he coordinates all 4 gyms here in the Meridian, Boise area. This is brought to you by AltruaHealthShare.org. So, Mike, we were talking about protein. We were talking about whey products. You were telling us about how much should we eat in protein a day?
So how much protein that we eat in a day is largely dependent on your goal and where you are in your life. So the question arises a lot in the gym setting is how much protein does my body really need? How much should I be consuming on a daily basis? And my response always comes down to overall calorie consumption first. Let's make sure that we have a good calorie goal established and we know how much food we want to consume on a daily basis. But it's also important to take a look at what each individual body needs. And my recommendation for most people is that we find 1 gram per pound of lean body mass. And so lean body mass is obviously largely dependent on your body fat percentage and your breakdown. But for most people, that's a good place to start for protein consumption.
How do you determine somebody's body fat?
There's a number of different ways. The way that I personally do it is through skin fold caliper testing, which is a fairly accurate way, and that's where we pinch several sites on the body and we plug those numbers into a calculation that then spits out a body fat percentage.
But what do you do with the older people who have this, should we say, inelastic skin and it kind of hangs all around?
Sure. The calipers kind of adjust for that because they have a certain degree of pressure on them. But we also do, handheld body fat testing that uses bioelectrical impedance. And that's just sends a signal throughout your body that gives a little less accurate, but still a valuable number for your body fat percentage.
So do you do this at the gym before you take on a client? You take them in and put them through a process. And what kind of process is that?
Yeah, every time. We always want to take them through a little bit bit of a process, and that process always starts with a goal-setting questionnaire. What are some of the things that you're looking to accomplish? What are your primary goals? How motivated are you? How many days a week are you willing to commit to this program? What does nutrition currently look like? We always want to get a good nutrition log from people so we can find out where our starting point is. And then we move on to basic measurements such as weight, body fat percentage, and circumference measurements. Those are very important to have. And finally, we move into finding out what is your current fitness level? What are some of the things that you're capable and able of doing so we can develop a program based around that that's going to be of most benefit for you.
So do you put them through a series of tests on different machines, or do you set a value on how long they can be on a treadmill or what their heart rate is? How do you determine this?
Yes, so we do a push, a pull, a squat, and a core test. So we're testing how well this individual is able to do pressing movements, pulling movements, squatting motions, and how the strength of the core is. And this will help to determine the type of exercises that we choose for an individual. And as far as the cardiovascular training goes, a lot of times that's determined based off of age and previous cardiovascular training experience. We combine that with just overall experience from the user when they do cardio training to establish good goals there.
So I know there's certain limits when you're doing cardio exercising because I've been through those before. Do you set those? Do you keep an eye on these people when they're doing their cardio, make sure they don't exceed their limits?
Sometimes it can be challenging to be there one-on-one with clients. So what we typically have them use is a heart rate monitor that then sends the client feedback based off of their cardio session. So in real time, we have most people tracking their heart rate with a chest strap that's 99.4% accurate to an EKG. So we can get real-time feedback on how hard we're working.
Now, what are the benefits of the cardio workout, and what are the common misconceptions of cardio?
I think some of the common misconceptions of cardio is that you have to spend a long time doing cardio. A lot of people think they need to go get on a piece of cardio equipment for 60 or 90 minutes at a time, and that's just not the case. The other thing with cardio is that you can do it outside. It doesn't have to be on a treadmill, or it doesn't have to be on an elliptical. We actually encourage people to get outside and get to moving. The most important thing for most people is just tracking those steps. How many steps are you taking on a daily basis? When somebody's first starting out, that can be a really valuable indicator of how well we're training the heart.
Do you believe in the 10,000 step revolution that's going to supposedly be taking place, where people are out there doing 10,000 steps a day to stay healthy?
I think it's a very good start. I don't think it's the answer to all of the health issues that we have, but if somebody did nothing else other than take 10,000 steps per day and pay more attention to their nutrition, starting to make some of the better choices, I think that they'd see some significant improvements in their health. As a whole, as a country, we don't take anywhere close to 10,000 steps per day, and that's an important part of fitness, is just being able to move.
Well, I can tell you, if you want to take 10,000 steps a day, get yourself a very large dog that likes to walk, because I do that every day. In fact, he takes me for a walk. What are the common misconceptions about weight training?
I think the misconceptions of weight training are that it's going to make you big and bulky if you do any kind of weight training, and that's just not the case. For most people, the weight training is actually going to help develop muscle tone and muscle strength, and it's not going to produce these large, bulky, unwanted muscles. That comes with a lot of other things associated with it. So I think that's the biggest misconception that I see, especially amongst our female population, is they want to avoid the weights for fear of getting bulky, when in all reality, it's just going to help to develop muscle strength and improve muscle tone, which is something that most people strive for.
So when you get an older guy that comes in there, like I was about a year and a half ago, and he has all of the bumps in the wrong places instead of where the muscle is supposed to be, how do you structure a workout for somebody who's actually been out of shape for, 10 or 20 years?
I think it's very important that you take a look at the big picture with something like that. And you talked about patience before, and we have to learn how to be patient and understand that this is a process where we start very slow and then we move forward from there. And we don't want to take the body and shock it right away, because if we do that, one of two things happens. Either you get discouraged because of the pain from the muscle soreness you feel, or you get discouraged because you're just not able to do some of the activities therapies that are prescribed to you. So we typically start on a lower intensity routine, maybe 2 to 3 times per week for the weight training, with at least 48 hours in between those sessions, and encourage just a lot of movement, whether it be on a treadmill or outside or on a different piece of cardio equipment.
So when you get these people in, do you find that a lot of them, I deal with a fair amount of chiropractors in this show, and they talk about people who go down to the gyms and they start exercising. They have no concept of what they're doing, and the next thing you know, they're throwing their backs out, and all kinds of things are happening to them. Do you find that happening at your place?
It absolutely happens, and I think a lot of that comes from people being a little too motivated to make change happen really quick. When we know that it takes a long time, if it took you 20 years to get out of shape, you better be prepared to take a little bit of time to get back into shape. And one of the biggest mistakes you make is go in too fast. And when you do that, one of two things ends up happening. You either get injured, or you hit a plateau that you can't get over. And so we really like to start slow and really build you from the core out. Start with those basic muscles that we need to train, and then get a little more advanced over time.
And when you talk about the core, what are you talking about?
I'm talking about everything that supports specifically the spine area. So we're talking about not just the abdomen region, but we're talking about lower back as well. We're talking about hips. And a lot of times when explaining this to people, I say we're talking about your go muscles, not your show muscles. And the go muscles are the ones that really work to support the different joints in the body, and they're the ones that nobody's ever really heard of. They're not your main movers, your primary muscle groups. They're the ones that lie deep within the body that help to make it function better.
Well, part and parcel of getting healthy and getting back into shape has to do with what you eat. And what do you think about vitamin supplements, mineral supplements? We've had varying people on the show who have had positive and negatives about them.
I think that when looking at supplements, we have to accept the reality, and that is it's a multi-billion-dollar market, and there's a lot of people that are trying to capitalize on that. So it's very hard to get good, accurate information on supplements. Now, that being said, supplements should be exactly what they are, and that's a supplement to a very good nutrition program. And so I think we should do everything we can through our nutrition program to get the vitamins, minerals that we need.
Well, Mike, I really want to thank you very much for joining us this evening. It's been an enlightening chance to have an opportunity to talk to you about nutrition and exercise, and somebody who actually is doing this every day of their lives. This is Bob Neugebauer signing off for Health Conclusions. We hope you will join us again the next week at the same time on Sunday between 5 and 6. And we'll have another opportunity to talk to some new and different people about your health, your medicines, and your nutrition. And this is all sponsored by AlchuaHealthShare.org, and we're on 580 KIDO.